Welcome to our first episode of God's podcast. My name is Isra, and today's guest is Brandon Bozarth.
I'm
How
excited
are
to be
you?
here. I'm doing really well. Yeah, really excited.
Yeah, I saw some of your GNM work and some of the sessions you had, which was extremely interesting. More so conflict and all that stuff. We're gonna talk about it towards the end. But today's episode is about sexuality, or it's gonna touch on a couple of things. And a couple of years ago, I realized that so many women that I have met have had some form of body boundary violation happen to them.
Mhm.
And of course, it puts you in a kind of a unsafe feeling, also makes you very hyper vigilant. And so the first question would be, how can women get access to their own feeling of safety?
It's really good. So, first couple of things, and I'll speak through the German New Medicine lens, is that
Mm.
one of the number one conflicts for a female is called a sexual frustration conflict. And it's typically in relationship to their dad and really doesn't have anything to do with sex, but has everything to do with safety. Now,
Mhm.
it's related to sex because a female's sexuality is considered part of her territory. It's what makes her biologically valuable because it's what leads to reproducing life. And so
Yes.
her territory and identity biologically is centered around the ability to produce life.
Mhm.
It's also their emotional state. This is where, uh, women as oracles and this sort of thing biologically comes from is, first of all, y'all's nervous system is twice as dense as a man, so you can literally feel more. And
Mhm.
then second is the womb space, the ability to um a sense be like a conduit for the creation of life
Mm.
is a very spiritual um archetype.
Yeah.
And so there's this, yes, on the animal level, it's sexuality and the ability to reproduce. That's the biological value of a woman.
Mhm.
Biological value of a man is the ability to provide a territory in which that
Yes.
reproduction can happen. So
Mhm.
this is where the biblical kind of narrative of a male leading the household and providing literally the external territory, the safety, the home, um, and if he were to claim his territory like a mammal would, he would pee on the outside of the territory where the woman would pee on the inside in the bed. Say,
Yes.
this is my territory because this is where we reproduce and probably where I'll have the baby.
Yes.
And in fact, bedwetting happens when what I say first, wed bedding,
Wet bedding, yeah.
wed bedding, um, happens when we feel like our territory is being threatened and we need
Really?
to mark it and our boundaries are not being honored. It's like if I live
That's
in a home and people
that
are
is so interesting.
barging
We
into my
strong men
room.
have that a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's
exactly.
boundary
And
crossing.
it's usually because, well, it could be because their parents are arguing. And if let's say if it's a female, she might wet the bed because her internal emotion, her territory, her emotional state, her inner sense of boundaries might be being violated because she's
Mm.
not feeling like her territory is safe and she's wondering, where do I belong? Where is it safe? So the body's trying to mark a territory and say, if you're going to argue and it's going to be unsafe over there, at least know this is mine. Stay away. If I
Mhm.
can't say it or if I can't control that, when a mammal pees on something, another animal is not going to sleep on it. So it's our animal body saying, stay away from here. I'm trying to reinforce my boundaries and my
Yeah.
territory.
That's so
So
interesting.
anyway,
Makes
back
a
to
lot
your
of sense.
original question, isn't
The
it?
original question was,
Yeah,
how can women get access to their own feelings of safety?
safety. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, when in a moment of unsafety, whether it's a male or a female, what that means, if it leads to what's called a biological conflict, which is something that's actually going to change your physiology,
Mm-hmm.
your hormones will change, your perception of men, yourself, the world will change because the moment of shock, which is required. It's called a DHS in German New Medicine terms, where you're caught off guard, you're overwhelmed, and you feel isolated, whether literally or emotionally. will lead to a circle imprint on part of the brain that then controls the organs, namely the sex organs. Depending on how it was perceived, it could hit the ovaries, the fallopian tubes, the cervix. So let's say it's the one that hits the cervix. So then what happens is you might be prone to infections, yeast infections. Every time you have a sexual encounter from that point forward where you feel like you weren't safe, you said yes when it was a no, there was some sort of reliving of that boundary violation, of that feeling of shock, overwhelm, isolation. And you think it's like a bacteria or something, but the bacteria just so happen to be there and they get blamed. It's like if a building was on fire and all these fire trucks came and you go, what caused the fire? Oh, the fire trucks. But actually, the fire trucks are there to put out the fire, and that's what the
Yeah.
bacteria is also there to do, which is to rebuild tissue or to break down tissue. And they work alongside us. That's a whole other conversation. But
Yeah.
so first of all, we have to understand what is unsafety, and then we can answer how do we create safety. First, the unsafe true unsafety, not just psychological, but biological, has to have those three components. You're shocked and overwhelmed, and children have a lot of shocking, overwhelming moments because they're experiencing the first time of many different things. So we think, oh, children, their immune system is underdeveloped. They get sick a lot. No, they don't get sick a lot because their immune system. They get sick a lot because they are shocked because they're experiencing the first time of so many different things. So it's very easy to shock a child. So they're getting shocked, caught off guard, overwhelmed, isolated. And let's say that experience is some form of abuse. Well, then their body is going to adapt. And that's nature's therapy. It goes, okay, well, now lower estrogen, right? Because that shocking moment hits the part of the brain that controls hormones, the temporal lobe of the female. And that female might then, because they're not feeling safe around their sexuality, their estrogen might tank because their body's saying sex isn't safe. So let me discourage you from having sex. Become more like a boy. So boys aren't interested in you. And then you have a tomboy phase. So
True.
women will have a shocking moment and then they'll have a tomboy phase because it's more safe to be like a boy than it is like a girl. It sounds like you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Uh-huh.
Now that you said that, already I'm thinking sexual orientation is not completely uninfluenced by our life, so to say,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. It's hormonal. Now they've done studies and you can't really find them anymore because they were scrubbed from the internet because
Of
it would
course.
disapprove a
Yeah.
massive, in my opinion, satanic mainstream narrative. But it's if they did these studies where they gave homosexual men testosterone, and
Mm,
once their testosterone reached a certain level, they were no longer interested in men; they became interested in women. So sexual orientation, in my view, is 100% determined by hormones. Now, what determines the hormones?
mm,
Your temporal lobe. Now, what
mhm,
kind of conflicts do we have in our temporal lobe? Territory conflicts. So, for a man, for example, I'll use the wolf pack as an analogy, but our brain works the same way as
mhm.
the wolf brain does in terms of biological hierarchy, which is where do I fit into the tribe? We, no matter if we want to admit it or not, hierarchy is in
Yeah.
nature, and we all have our place. So men will compete to be the alpha. Why? Because an alpha gets their choice of all the women and they get to reproduce their line. And that's the point, the biology's point, the purpose of biology just wants
Yeah.
to survive and reproduce. So let's say a man is dating a woman and she cheats on him
Mhm.
and then leaves him. And he might now have, let's say, territory loss because the man, he's not considering his internal world his territory. He's considering the woman his territory. And he's considering his work his territory, his home his territory. This is why
Exactly.
every man needs a man cave. They're really adamant on having their own territory because that's what gives them biological value. They are not born with biological value to the same in the same way that a female is. So
Mhm.
they're motivated to establish it and say, almost like the peacock that's like, look at me, look what I can give and offer to you. And the woman
Mhm.
is like, it's already built into me. I
Yeah.
am the prize, you know. So if a man loses his territory, let's say it loses his partner,
Mhm.
And maybe there was something like some betrayal or some lying, and there was also some territory anger there, maybe that really intense arguments in the home. Now he's having multiple DHSs, and we'll assume they fit those three criteria: overwhelmed, shocked, isolated.
Mm-hmm.
He's having several DHS form on his temporal lobe. Now, let's say he gets one more conflict, and it's a little less intense than the ones that just arose on his right temporal lobe. That temporal lobe will start shutting down, and the new conflicts will switch to the other side of the brain. And it does this because it will, as the hormones dip, because essentially what happens is that man gets castrated
Mm-hmm.
emotionally. He loses his maleness. The DHS will cause his testosterone to tank because, and I will go back to the animal kingdom. If a wolf challenges the alpha and the alpha wins, the wolf that loses is probably close to death, number one.
Yeah.
Number two becomes the beta male. And now the only way that it can survive is to become not a threat to that alpha, because he knows that alpha could kill me now because I
Mm-hmm.
just lost. That's a territory loss in of itself. So he will either become gaily fixated on the alpha to be more like the women, because the
Mm-hmm.
alpha gives protection to the women, doesn't he? He goes, oh, I
Yeah.
got to protect these women. So he'll want to become more like them, but that serves his survival. Now, this is
Mm.
obviously what we also see in the world,
True, 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 true.
right?
Yeah, I actually had a young male once come to me for a consultation, and he was asking if he is actually gay. He was like really just wondering, am I gay? Is it not? And we went
Mhm,
into there, and actually, I found out that his father got along well with his mother, but he didn't get along well with him.
mhm,
So he started actually being more like his mother just to get the
mhm,
approval of his father. And now it's
mhm,
unconscious. So he lives, basically goes out to college and feels like he's attracted to males when in
mhm,
reality it's just a conflict. So that's
mhm,
very interesting. I'm with you here completely.
mhm, mhm. Cool. So yeah, in that example, and that's one of many examples, I've heard the same thing. In fact, I think they've done studies specifically, I think it was with males, homosexual males,
Yeah.
but it's something like 50% or more have had sexual trauma or
Hmm.
come from a broken home.
Yes.
Now these can all, it depends on that person's psyche, but all of these can be interpreted as a kind of territory conflict, other conflicts as well.
Hmm.
Um, but so anyway, back to the wolf example, that wolf will have to become gaily fixated. The hormones of that wolf will change, and in a
Hmm.
sense, the maleness of that wolf will diminish. So back to your original question, I just wanted to give like a foundation
Yeah.
for people to understand that the biology of the wolf is doing what it needs to do for that wolf to be safe. It's
Mm.
saying, don't be a threat to the alpha. So our biology will automatically adapt. And when we get what's called constellated, when we have a series of conflicts in the same part of this is where it gets a little complex, but the same part of the brain, so the temporal lobe, right side, temporal lobe, left side, both of those hemispheres, that part of the brain in utero
Hmm.
grows from the same skin layer. So
Mm.
every organ that grows from the same skin layer, the part of the brain that is also of that same skin layer, the brain governs those organs. So like everything that grows out of the endoderm, and I'm not remembering all the organs, but let's say it's the liver and kidneys, then the part of the brain that also grew from the endoderm is what governs those organs. It's all
Hmm.
connected. So
Interesting.
this the our biology is already doing what it believes it needs to do over millions of years of
Mm.
evolution to keep us safe. It's saying change your hormones, and that will change your perception of yourself and others, and that will change your behavior, and that will keep you safe.
Mhm.
Now, if we stay there, it is our body doing, it already knows what it needs to do to create safety. But if
Mhm.
we stay there, if we don't make the transition from human animal to human spirit, then we will still keep unresolved conflicts alive in us. And life is such that we're going to keep recreating the original event in a different disguise until that conflict gets resolved. And really, in most simple terms, it's through forgiveness. But we can dissect what that means, but it's through real legitimate forgiveness that we can resolve those original conflicts. And then what happens is we'll undo, our hormones will change, we'll go through a healing phase. And most often, the organs that were affected will actually rebuild back stronger. It's the what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
That's actually interesting.
And that's
forgiveness.
Yeah.
Because I think forgiveness in itself is so misunderstood.
Absolutely.
Yeah, can you maybe touch on what is truly forgiving someone that maybe raped you or done anything very horrible? How can we actually forgive from the sincerity of our hearts?
Yeah, it's really good. So first of all, I think the figure of Jesus Christ is the perfect example of, look, if he could forgive everything that happened to him. First of all, you can forgive. Number one, it's going to inspire possibility. Number two, it's about understanding what forgiveness is. First, number one, it's not that I forgive you for what you did unto me. It's there was some way my psyche interpreted what happened to me. And that became an identity. So it could be, okay, I was beaten. And my psyche said, that means I'm powerless, dirty, bad, wrong, worthless, right? And then the words that really represent an energy, but let's say those words, that I am this or I am not that, becomes who I think I am. And then it's like a context. I live within that frame, and I will trade my authenticity for that identity, and I'll keep recreating versions of it in my life. Even if it's not abuse, it might just be I keep attracting abusive men. I keep finding myself in situations where I feel powerless. And that process that's in time, not just a single event, the process that's in time, that's happening over and over, that's suffering. And that's not necessarily the origin of that, isn't necessarily the physical event. It's what happens in my psyche in response to the physical event. So I have to first, in a healthy way, disassociate the physical event from the cause of my suffering. As long as I'm thinking the physical event is that absolute cause, I have to remain a victim, because there's nothing I can do about what happened. But we have to see, is it what happened, or is it my unconscious mind's story about what happened that caused me to perceive this in a certain way, that turned on a certain program, that changed who I am authentically, to adapt and now to search for safety. Which, what kind of people search for safety? People that don't feel safe.
Yes.
So the moment I search for it, I'm actually pushing it away. I'm actually saying safety's not here. And I'm continuing to say that day by day by day. And that's the good news, is to realize that, oh, that may be unconscious. But as soon as I make it conscious, it's no longer a habit I'm unaware of. It's a choice. So I have to be able to go back to that event, and it doesn't mean we have to relive it, but I have to go back to that version of me, and I have to see how did that change my identity? What must have been true about me in this situation in order for me to then feel and believe what I was feeling and believing since then, and how I altered my behavior. And it might just be, I'm not safe, the world isn't safe. I'm in danger, the world is dangerous. It might be I'm worthless. And so we have to find that identity and see for yourself that it's not true. It's just an identity, and that you didn't even choose it at the time. Because it's not like we're not going from blaming them to blaming ourselves. We're going to a blameless place where what happened happened, and it was painful and it was wrong. It was all those things. That's all real. But what I'm carrying with me was an automatic process of my psyche that's a result of my conditioning that simply said, this means blank about me. And the
Mm.
moment I took that on, I had to live a life of proving it right. And that's the suffering. Pain and suffering are different. So once we can recognize what that is and question it, and here's the hint, none of those identities are true. None of them that cause suffering are true. But when you have that revelation and see it for yourself, you can then start to experience life in the absence of that identity, which is kind of like a coming home. It's like the prodigal son coming back home. You go, man, I've thought I was worthless and powerless and in danger. I've been believing that my entire life. If
Mm.
that's not true, who would I be in its absence? And that starts to show you the more authentic you. And we go, okay, so if I can go all the way into the darkness of my experience to go through this process of taking on an identity that's not who I am, to come back to I am, but with all that wisdom, then when I really start to live in the absence of that identity, then I don't spend time trying to avoid recreating what happened. It's not even in my consciousness anymore because I've literally become a new person. I'm not the person that's unconsciously proving I'm not safe, I'm not worthy. That's the person, that identity.
Mm.
I'm what's there in its absence. And every time I ask that question to someone, what's there in the absence of that identity? It's the same thing: freedom, peace, acceptance, openness. And then you start asking that question. Okay, well, what would change in my work life? What would change in my relationships in the absence of this identity? Who would
Mm.
I be? What would be different? And you get a spontaneous, deeply personal answer of what needs to change in your life to reflect who you really are. And that version of you, I would suggest, you couldn't even conceive of, let alone manifest into your experience without the tragedy of what happened. That was God moving you in the direction of who he's designed you to become.
So almost we are turning this whole thing around to become grateful even for the pain that happened.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's so
That's how you
beautiful.
know. That's actually how you know you've resolved.
And forgave.
It's you could be grateful. You could laugh at all of the misunderstandings that you believed about yourself. You go, oh my God, I was so confused.
Mm.
You forgive. Forgiving is all actually forgetting. It's not like you actually literally forget, but you just stop ruminating.
Yeah.
And you don't spend any energy trying to avoid something that happened in the past. And what's in its place is infinite possibility, not anxiety and control. It's okay, what's possible?
Mm. Beautiful answer, really. Thank you. You laid the foundation for actually people who listening in for the first time to actually understand it's not just a simple reason or solution. It's really a deep resolving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always say it's
Um,
a process of re-identification. It's not changing perceptions and beliefs.
mm,
That's perceptions and beliefs are influenced by our identity. And so it's a layer deeper than that. And then as we question those foundational building blocks to our identity, the whole world changes because it's like we're wearing blue tinted glasses. You have to tint the entire world blue. But if I asked you what's blue, you'd go, I don't know. But then you take off the glasses, you go, oh my God, that's been blue. I haven't even seen it.
it's almost like a
And
filter you
exactly,
saw in your brain.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I have another question. Does, for example, like abandonment wound, does it get stored in the brain in a specific area?
It does. Yeah. So the abandonment wound affects the kidneys.
Yeah, I have
That
that.
okay. Okay. I'm forgetting. I think it's hmm, maybe new mesoderm. I'm forgetting the germ layer. What part of the brain? But yeah, it
Mm.
affects the kidneys, and it'll create water retention. It's kind of like the stubborn weight that you can't lose because it's not actually
It's
fat.
causing
It's just water
related
weight.
to weight?
It's related to weight. It can, yeah, it'll
Oh.
like you'll have swelling. You might have swelling in joints or in your legs, water
Mhm.
retention. If you're in a hanging healing, which is going between the two phases of healing, which is to be conflict active, which there's very little symptoms, if any. Most of the time, there's no symptoms. When you have symptoms, that signals the healing phase. So the healing phase of the kidney program is night sweats. So you'll have night sweats because the TB bacteria is repairing the kidneys, and that certain bacteria always there needs to be a certain heat condition in order for that to happen, and the heat is also for you to get the water out. So why that happens is if you're being abandoned, think about being in a tribe and the tribe's like, okay, we're going to kick you out. Your body goes, okay, we need to hold on to water and all of our resources so we don't dry out and dehydrate. So that's the adaptation. That's the survival purpose of it. But of course, we can be in a room full of people and still feel abandoned, and the program can still be on because the brain doesn't know the difference between being kicked out of a tribe literally and being kicked out of a tribe in our psyche.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. I have another question related to hypersexuality and giving birth because I saw a video of yours,
Mhm.
and I want you to explain what does hypersexuality typically is a response to, from what trauma exactly become.
Yeah. So you know what? I think I might have misspoke earlier. Let me look it up real quick. I know one of them is territory loss. So the loss of your sexual partner. Okay, I think it's territory loss and sexual rejection.
Mhm.
Let me just double check. I'm
Perfect.
pretty sure that that's it, actually.
This is almost like a handbook. You know
I know.
what?
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay. So
exciting.
sexual conflict and territory loss. Yeah, I was right.
Yeah.
So now imagine, and I experienced this. I went after this was maybe, man, how long ago now? Maybe 2 years ago now.
Mhm.
I had a devastating, traumatic, I mean, the most intense experience for me,
Yeah.
trauma wise, of my life about 2 years ago in a relationship where
Mhm.
there was lying, cheating, betrayal. I thought she was pregnant, and then she slept with her ex partner while we were together, and then the lying, and then the argue. I mean, it was like so nasty. And I was so ashamed. How the heck did I look
Get
over
into
all
it.
of these red flags? I'm a teacher, and this is how, who the hell am I to teach? I stopped working. I mean,
Mhm.
it really brought me to my knees. And so, um, I had both of those: territory loss
Mhm.
and a sexual conflict, which was really a sexual rejection, which is a very common way to have a sexual conflict. So
Mhm.
think of it this way: this territory loss hits, and these are both, um, I think these are both, yeah, these are temporal lobe conflicts.
Mhm.
So I had territory loss first, sexual rejection second, and I already had I had a lower testosterone count than I normally would because I had territory loss and territory anger. And then I had the sexual conflict. And because I already had the two here, it
Mhm.
went to the other side of my brain. And that's when you constellate. That's when it says, okay, this is actually, and this is the purpose of constellations without getting too complex. The purpose
Mhm.
of a constellation is if the biological load, meaning, okay, I'm taking so many hits in one part of the temporal lobe that the organs can't adapt to that much conflict load. When you have a DHS, that circle that appears on your brain that adapts to stress, it requires 10 times more glucose just to be there, just for the adaptation to be on. So sugar cravings,
On a
I
daily
need to eat
basis.
more on a daily
On a
basis. So
daily
you need
basis.
on a
Yeah.
daily basis. So it's like it's requiring so much energy that once you get overloaded, instead of turning on more biological adaptations, it says you need to do a behavioral adaptation because we don't have the energy to adapt your biology anymore. So this is where things like bipolar, megalomaniac,
Mhm.
um, schizophrenia, OCD, ADHD, all of these are behavioral adaptations that
Mhm.
take the conflict load off your organs. In other words, they save your life. And when I got my CAT scan read by a mentee of Dr. Hammer, he
Mhm.
said to me, your constellation is literally keeping you from a heart attack. And once I resolved my constellation, I had many heart attacks. I went through that and it was fine. I knew they were coming. It was fine. I wasn't afraid of them because I know what they are.
Part of
But
healing it is actually like having the physical issue that you were supposed to have.
yeah, so in short, before, and I'll come back to this, is
Yeah.
that like a heart attack, for example, is what's called an epicrisis.
Mhm.
An epicrisis is once you resolve. So I resolved my territory loss. Now I have to double check. I don't think the heart attack was from my territory loss. I think it was my from my overwhelm conflict.
Mhm.
Overwhelm, I think, hits the heart wall, where territory loss, I think, is the artery, one of the, like an aortic valve or artery. I don't remember the
Mhm.
specifics, but um, so once I resolved actually both of those, I had a week where I was just having these cramps in my heart, and a couple that were really intense, and then ones that I wouldn't consider heart attacks, but some initially that probably were. And what that is the epicrisis, and it always happens at night, usually around like the 3 a.m. hour
Mhm.
when you're in deep rest. The part of the brain that governs the heart, well, remember that DHS, that circle,
Yeah.
when you've resolved, your body no longer needs that program. So what does it do? It swells up that area temporarily with liquid, because all healing happens in a liquid environment, and
Mhm.
it starts to scar that area. Now, once the scarring is complete, which is healing, it
Mhm.
no longer needs the liquid, the edema fluid there. So it squeezes it out. And when it squeezes it, that organ that it is governing has a reaction, because the brain is governing the organ. So it depends on the organ. This is where things like epileptic seizures, fainting, all comes from. It's actually a healing crisis. It's the signal that if you can survive that, then you're going to go into a healing phase, and it means you've actually resolved a conflict. It doesn't mean you're conflicted. It doesn't mean it's not because you ate too much butter. None of that. None of that's true. It's you actually resolve something, and now you're going into a healing phase. So
Mhm.
back to the constellation,
Yeah.
think about this. If someone loses their partner, their hormones may start to dip from that territory loss. Now, if they're also feeling sexual, they get a sexual rejection, their biology is going become hypersexual, so you can get a mate, have sex with them, and once if it's good, then you're not going to feel sexually rejected anymore. And if they become
Mhm.
your mate, especially if you can get them pregnant, you're not going to lose your territory loss will also be resolved. So your body motivates you as you ruminate on sexuality, as you ruminate on the opposite sex. The the male version of this is like the smooth talker. You'll say anything, do anything, like Mr. Suave to, you know,
Mhm.
and it's like I've heard it said too. Yes, it's sex. Like the man wants sex, but he just more wants to feel not rejected, like held and not rejected. And with the female, it's similar, except her agenda, whether she really knows it or not, often will be to get pregnant. Because if she can get pregnant, and then she completely will resolve her territory loss, because she's produced territory that is hers, that child. And there's no way around that. And if she has an identity conflict, it also resolves her identity conflict, because now she's undeniably a mother. And her sexual rejection will also go away, because she's fulfilled the purpose of sex biologically.
Mhm.
So she will resolve many conflicts by getting pregnant. And quite literally, I mean, I'll tell you, investigating this helped me have so much compassion for my
Mhm.
ex, because I was over here being like, wait a second, you were lying to me. You were cheating.
Mhm.
But you still told me you wanted to have my baby. Like I literally thought she was pregnant when the cheating happened. We were like
Mhm.
planning on a baby coming, and then that happened. And I was sitting there after being like, how could someone say all those things and then be so nasty,
Mhm.
but yet tell me at the same time, I really want to have your baby? I'm like
Mhm.
so incredibly confused.
Right.
Absolutely. Constellation. And once I understood, it was like, oh yeah. And I started to empathize, because that's what constellations will do when you understand them. You start to empathize. I go, oh wait, she hasn't felt safe around a male her whole life because of her upbringing. She didn't have an identity or a home. All of the, she had territory loss her whole life. I started to go, oh my God, like this, she had no choice. This was her biology going, the only way for me to, and using my body to get attention and, like the need for so much attention and love for men all the time was just to get pregnant. She just wanted, underneath it all, just to resolve
The
all
conflict.
of this tension of the conflicts. Then
Hmm.
I went, okay, wow, this is this is not personal. This is biology. This is her best attempt with her awareness to adapt to these shocking moments. And I understand now. And it helped me, really have compassion.
Mm-hmm. That's such a beautiful way it turned out at the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I do have a question about what is the role of the heart in sexuality?
Interesting. The heart and sexuality. I mean, not much beyond men and women need to be in a they need to feel safe to be fully aroused. So obviously they need to be in a kind of normatonia or vagatonia, which is really that rest and relax state. Um, when a male or a female climaxes, they actually go sympathetic. So they go into that an intense kind of fight or flight, and obviously the heart will pump
Yeah.
and be very active at that time. Um, but on a biological level, not much
Not much.
besides that.
Okay, okay. And even as an energy center,
Mhm.
also doesn't it have any correlation with
Yeah,
sex?
I mean, I would say within now, if we're talking energetic and spiritual, I would say that um, lust or animal attraction.
Mm-hmm.
I believe, this is my personal belief, that that's meant to be a bridge into love. So it's like I'm being pulled to this person so that I might experience union with them, God, love with them. And I would say, yeah, we could call that heart, that being in your heart. And I would say if you're not having sex from that place,
Mm-hmm.
then you're probably conflicted in some way. You're probably not using sex. Our biology says just use sex to reproduce. But, Genesis says sex is a gift to be given to a married couple. It's the gift. It's meant to be enjoyed. That's not a biological reason. The biological reason is reproduce. And why does it feel good to reproduce? The higher reason is it feels good to celebrate and to share love with your partner.
Perfect. Great answer. I have another question. Is there maybe a ratio in between for a woman or a male as to how much feminine and masculine energy is supposed to be in the body for us to be balanced?
Hmm. Yeah. So, this is such an interesting, I love these questions. They're
That's
so
great.
good. It's ISRA, right?
Yeah, yeah.
ISRA. Yeah. I love these questions. So, for a long time, I subscribed to this belief of balancing masculine and feminine. There's nuances to this conversation, but I think I'm mostly leaning towards the idea that that's a bunch of bullshit. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason I say that is because biologically speaking, there's no such thing as balancing masculine and feminine. You are either biologically male or biologically female based on your hormones, based on your brain, based on what the events that happened in your psyche and how they've affected your brain. So if a male starts becoming more feminine, the only reason is because he has multiple DHS conflicts that told him to adapt, and his hormones thus changed. So his way of perceiving and relating to the world changes. He will literally start to feel more introverted. He will start to be more depressed. Like when a female gets depressed, it's like this quiet inward depression. When a
Mm-hmm.
male gets depressed, it's like this manicky, I gotta figure it out. And oh, no, no. So
Yeah.
he'll start to have the female version. He'll start wondering about things like, where do I belong and fit in? And who am I? And will be more worried about identity. Maybe he'll feel less driven in his work. He'll just want to be nurtured more, and nurture. His interests may change. So this is what it would look like for him to be more biologically feminine. Now, there's no at least from my experience, there's not a lot of happiness and fulfillment if you're a man and you're very biologically feminine, because it's an adaptation to
Mm,
these shocking moments. So I would say the real, or a more fruitful um, question and direction for people would be, how do I simply resolve my conflicts and live
mm,
my design? Because I believe our designs are designed to be fulfilling unto themselves. We don't need to be balance anything. It's just, are there conflicts unresolved? And when I resolve them, my hormones are what they are. And guess what?
mm.
I enjoy being a man when I'm not conflicted. And women enjoy being women. They enjoy
When they're
being
not.
receptive. They enjoy, yeah, like they enjoy taking care of the dwelling place of the family and making a house into a home,
Yeah.
and the nurturing aspects, and the uh, being able to take care and see the inner workings of a man and connect on that level. It's like it's so natural for a woman. So I think it's more about, how do we bring more femininity out of women and more masculinity
Yeah.
out of men? And then them two together, that's the balance.
True, because they are a team, and to begin with.
Right,
Yeah.
right, right.
I do have another question. What is erectile dysfunction? From, because we kind of touched on hypersexuality for women, but what does erectile dysfunction mean in the psyche?
Yeah, so that's primarily from self-devaluation for men. So if a male has an interaction with a woman, and let's say the woman, after he's like, they had sex, he goes, "So how was that for you?" And she went, "Nah, okay."
Mm,
That might be a DHS for him, right? Because again, his biological value, it's like, well, I need to be able to satisfy a woman in order that she's going to want to reproduce with me.
mhm,
And, if I can provide the seed, the home, right? It's all about what he can provide. If he feels like he can't provide, or it's threatened, or it's wrong, or it's attacked, or he's discouraged, or she's interested in someone else, or he's being compared. This is why the main tool of a woman to hurt a male is her words. A male is most afraid, not of death, of being humiliated by a woman.
mhm.
A woman very often is most afraid of a man killing, dominating,
Yeah.
or physically dominating her. So
Yes.
the man, if he feels humiliated, and this was part of what I experienced in my last relationship, which was way more painful than anything physical. It was this
Mm,
sense of feeling humiliated and attacked. So anything around sexuality, especially if like it's during or right after the act of sex, that association is there, could
mm,
hit the man in the part of the brain that controls the muscle that
mhm,
actually allows him to have an erection.
mhm.
And it would actually just weaken that muscle. There would be cell loss and necrosis, because that's how self-devaluation, one way that self-devaluation expresses itself.
Very interesting. And how can men do something today to help themselves, maybe not devaluing themselves so much?
I mean, first and foremost, you should follow Jesus Christ as the best male role model on the planet.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's it. Because number one, it's going to cause you to completely re-identify. It's going to cause you to look at everywhere you're not living in your design, and to go through a process of forgiveness and repentance. And repentance really just means a change in thinking. You're going to start going the opposite way, and you'll start to build a relationship with God, because I believe Jesus is God wrapped in flesh, and he came to reveal to us the nature of God in a way we can understand. And
Yeah.
so it's this beautiful relationship of, wait a second, am I loved? Who am I? What's God? What's my purpose? And if you, as a man, aren't taking those questions really seriously, then you're going to look for value in how a woman sees you. And then
Mm,
you're probably going to attract a woman that's not going to value you, because she wants a man who knows his value
mm,
and is on fire for life and his purpose and his mission. And that's what a biological male looks like. So if that becomes your priority, God, mission, purpose, you will start to value you. And that's another way of saying, being and living your design, being your authentic self, is value itself. You don't have to learn to value yourself. You will automatically, that's the design, feel valued when you're living your design. It's not a matter of will. It's not an affirmation. It's not a practice. It's a principle. So when you start living from that place, you'll start getting reflections back of what you're living.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Actually, good that you brought Jesus Christ into this.
Mm-hmm.
So I was born Muslim actually, and then astral, when I was doing astral projection, I was trying to find out where in the universe things have incarnated. And
Wow.
I went way far, really, really far away, like outside of our universe.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw, what is this? And Jesus Christ was standing there in the astral projection and saying, I am God in the flesh. And
Mm-hmm.
that what made me like really think about it as, oh, he's really God in the flesh. Because
Mm-hmm.
how come I see him? I wasn't absolutely not thinking about him or anything,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
just trying to find it out through astral projection. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden, Jesus Christ came and was actually telling me that he is God in the flesh. And he is the incarnation of not the universe, but a superverse almost in
Mm-hmm.
the flesh. That's
Mm-hmm.
so beautiful. And
Mm-hmm.
I believe in Jesus Christ now.
Oh, that's amazing. That's so amazing. It's something special because in GNM, and this is something I'm working for in my course, The Circle,
Yeah.
I'm looking at in the mainly the teachings of Jesus, but some in the Old Testament, the design of humans and how we're instructed to be in relationship,
Yeah.
to build the kingdom of God, which really means to reproduce the image of Christ in our
Absolutely.
lineage. And so, how do you reproduce it? Well, first you have to live it. And a part of living that is to recognize where you're not living it. And this is usually where you have chronic symptoms. Chronic symptoms are going to show you what part of your psyche is still conflicted and where a form of re-identification and forgiveness has not yet happened. So
Mm,
the body is this learning device. It's saying, I'm going to, sometimes through necessity, force you to look at aspects of yourself where you're living out of your design, which I would say is sin. You're
mhm,
living out of your design perpetually. And in the forgiveness process, the repentance process, the transformation of that, you will, number one, live, you'll be more of your authentic self, but you'll also, that void, that God void, will
mhm.
start to be filled, because when we live our design as we were created, there just is a kind of fulfillment there.
Yes.
And um, I think that because Jesus is already in the psyche of every human, and the Bible says, I will reveal myself to everyone on the planet, everyone.
Yes.
And I do believe even people in other countries at some point they will, a dream, whatever it is, it will be
Yes.
revealed
I see so many
that
people
Jesus
experiencing this.
represents a bridge.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean,
He's
I had
coming
Jesus
to
come to me
show
last
us
night in a
how
dream, and
to
I don't
be.
think that's a normal thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, but he's already in the psyche. Everyone on the planet already has answers to these questions. Who's
Mm,
Jesus Christ? Did he actually resurrect? Is he who he says he is, or is it a myth, or da da da? They all have answers, whether they want to or not. And it's
yeah.
already influencing the questions. Who am I? What is God? It's already having an influence. So to get that relationship right will transform your psyche, and it will redefine what it means to be human, because
Yeah.
he didn't live dictated by his animal body. His animal body is like, hell no, I don't want to be, hung up on a cross. And he was sitting there praying to God, if it's your will, please take this from me. And he had our struggles, right? Because it's like God wanted to show the empathy through Jesus of, oh, I want to know what it's like to be human, but
Mhm.
also be fully God. And so he went through those struggles and transcended them. And then he's redefined. It's like he's broken us loose just
Mm,
from being biological creatures, which sometimes the German new medicine world will, you'll stay there, you'll get very, it becomes too
yeah.
material. And you'll go, oh, it's just biology, it's just the way that it is, and it's absolute king. No, no, no.
Mm.
Jesus is king, and it
Yes.
could transcend biology. And we see that over and over. We see miracle healings, and GNM actually can't explain those. It can't
Really?
explain a tumor disappearing in a minute, because the way German new medicine, and I've experienced this with clients, I've had clients dissolve fibroids in 2 weeks with a scan before and after, and it's completely gone. Now that makes sense with German new medicine because it takes about 2 weeks for the bacteria to dissolve that tumor. Now, what about tumors, this big that dissolve in 60 seconds that we have footage of? That's not bacteria,
Mm-mm.
unless it's some hyper, just, these
Yeah,
bacteria did a bunch of lines of
that is
something.
God right
It's
there.
not bacteria. So you're
Yeah.
like, what is that? We don't know. So we just, I'm careful to try to make GNM the answer to everything when there is apparently, very obviously, exceptions to the natural world, something above that. And I think we should remain open.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I actually looked into your GNM work, and I knew somebody that took a session with you. Excuse me. Her name was Cassie, and she was like describing how something opened and it was like
Mhm.
gone, and it never happened again. She had like some trouble like a couple weeks after that because she was still releasing the rest of it, right? But
Yeah.
she looked completely different.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
look different. That
Hmm.
even you look different from the before and after pictures of
Hmm.
resolving the morsel conflict. That was
Right.
so. I was like, how you guys?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's
It's really
really
amazing.
in the brain. It's really in the trauma that
Yeah.
we almost create our lives to be more complicated and more suffering and more. Yeah,
Hmm. Yeah.
wonderful. Um, can I ask you something? Because I'm so interested in the GNM session. Actually, I wanted to book one
Mhm.
and record it and maybe even show the people, what exactly happens.
Yeah,
Uh,
that'd be great.
yeah, if you're willing, I would record it and just put it out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
In my course, I have about, I don't know, 8 to 10 one-on-one sessions with clients.
Mm,
And all the ones in the course, I think most of them, if not all of them, we find resolution. They actually resolve a biological conflict on the call. And then that night they have night sweats or the
yeah.
diarrhea the next day. They have their epicrisis, and then for 2 to 3 weeks they have a healing phase. And a lot of times it's like they're resolving an abandonment story with their mom, and then they're having a phone call with them and reconciling, and boom, it transforms. And this is another reason why, again, I'll just add with Jesus Christ is a relational figure. All of our conflicts are relational. So
Hmm.
when we can have a relational figure with such a degree of love, then there is transformation that happens because our biology understands relationship.
Hmm. That's a beautiful way of putting it, honestly. True. All now that I'm thinking about it, truly all the conflicts are relational because we are born from a mother and a father and they teach us some things and all that stuff. If you would hatch from an egg, it
Hmm.
wouldn't be that way, right?
Hmm.
You would
Well,
come out
you have
and
some like morsel conflicts. It depends on what we say relational means. Yes, it could include another person, but it might
mhm,
be it's if there's not another person involved, it's just the relationship between you and a morsel. So it's like for a child, if they're drinking their mother's milk, and then the mother gives them a formula,
yeah.
and that body goes, I don't recognize this phony food. You might
Mm,
start having diarrhea and bloating and gas, which is all a morsel conflict. So yes, it's definitely relational because the mother is switching this out, but the primary cause of the morsel conflict, yes, it's the mother, but it's also this foreign substance that the body's like, we don't know what to do with this. This is not natural.
yeah. Interesting.
So you have the older parts of the brain that govern things that even single cells have digestion and reproduction. So you have the oldest part of the brain governing that. And then as we grow and evolve, and we're more social, and our territory matters, and shame matters because you have to stay in the tribe so you're not abandoned.
Yeah.
As it gets more complex, it becomes way more relational in terms of human to human.
Mm, that's so interesting. I mean, I do have a question. It's kind of non-related. And I wrote it down because I think a lot of people are slightly maybe confused about it. And what does it mean to be non-binary from your perspective?
Confused. That's what it means.
Infused.
It means you're confused. No,
Yeah,
confused.
that's what I'm saying.
Okay, so let me break it down. So number one, you probably have an identity conflict. I can't speak for everyone because it's
Yes.
so personal,
And
but
it's
there is
complex.
usually, yeah, it's probably some form of an identity conflict. I don't know who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I trust me, I've had that. I've had an identity conflict. I've seen it on my own brain scan. It's tough. It's a tough one, especially as
Mm-hmm.
a male, because that's a female side. So when my testosterone tanked and I had another conflict, I didn't have the male version, I had the female version. And that's a very inward, isolating, where do I belong? It's
Yeah.
a scary place. So again, the compassion is important. Um, but it's also, I've never met a biological male or biological female that's non-binary.
Mm-hmm.
So again, the females that are non-binary are usually in a masculine hormonal status, and it's like the feminist, it's like the achiever in the workforce. So it's these
Driven from
very
conflict again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then the men that are non-binary, a lot of them have lost their masculine hormonal status. So it's not like they're on fire for their mission and purpose and they want to provide and have a family. I've never
Mhm.
met someone say, "Yeah, I'm non-binary and my values are to have family, to be
Yeah.
on purpose and on fire for God and life." Like you never hear that. So
No.
so typically, at least what I've seen is you're not in your native hormonal status if
Mm,
you're that far down the chain and need to be seen as non-binary because it's just enough. Like when your temporal lobes are clear and you've at least majority of them, you've cleared a lot of those conflicts and your hormones balance out,
mm.
you don't want to be anything else. It feels good to be a male for a male, and it feels good to be a female for a
A
female. You don't
female.
need to be anything else. It's
True.
enough.
You don't need to be a mixture of both, right?
Right.
Yeah. I do have a question again because Bashar, for example, does say that he is non-binary.
Yeah.
How is that different from us as humans and maybe the Asasani beings?
Well, it's like I think that the soul obviously is not
Mhm.
binary.
Yeah.
Uh, God is non-binary.
Yeah.
And that just means
True.
there's not two, and there's not a gender.
Yeah.
So that's the truth in that movement. The LGBTQ movement is,
Fine.
we are in our essence who and what we really are doesn't have a gender.
Yes.
And that's the truth in it. But we're biological right now. We do have
Yeah.
genders, at least for this life, we do.
Mhm.
So and that you are going to be governed and your perception is going to be influenced by your hormones
Yes.
based on the body that you got. So there's no way around that. So it's like, great, we have to honor both truths. You can't use the spiritual truth to bypass the biology and bypass your trauma. And you also, you don't want to get too material and go, oh, well, I'm a man and that's my full identity, right?
Mhm.
Because that's also not totally true. If you had, your genitals cut off
Yeah.
and you're castrated, then would you consider you're not the same person anymore? You're not you. It's like when people get limbs chopped off, they don't feel less them
Mhm.
because the you that you are is still the you that you are. This is why we say things like my body. And the
Mhm.
my we're referring to isn't the body. We're not going, this is the body's body. We're going, it's my body. And we're
Mhm.
referring to the soul or the consciousness. And so it's important to have them both, just not to distort them.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I do have another question about being transgender, and Um, this has always been a hard thing for me because I innately understand that if we are born in a specific body, and whether that's female or male, it means that this is the one you're supposed to learn from the most,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
This is the one you're supposed to be in right now. And
Hmm.
I do think that mutilating the body and cutting maybe things off, just to, again, you cannot really change the DNA structure, right?
Right.
You can only change the outside to look maybe like something, but at
Hmm.
the from if you open it from the inside, it looks the same.
Yeah, your
That's
chromosomes
my
aren't changing.
Yeah, so that's the illogical thing about it. You may
Hmm.
maybe look like a woman or a male, but you're
Yeah.
not really.
Yeah. I mean, the root issue is really materialism. It's this whole
Mm,
paradigm in the West of scientism and materialism. You are this meat suit, it's a random universe, there's no
yeah,
God, this atheist movement. Then
absolutely.
your body becomes God. You have to kind of self-worship. And then it's like,
Um,
okay, how do I find happiness? Well, if I don't feel like a man, first of all, I can make it a mistake. I could be the exception of the rule for some reason. Because if I look into nature, point
yeah.
to a mistake in nature, you can't find one.
Mm,
That's a human concept. So if you go, I'm in the wrong body, number one, that's not true. You're in the body you're in, and then you can tell a story about it. Now,
exactly.
what's motivating you telling that story? I'm not saying you're just making up that
Mhm.
you don't feel like you're in the right body. That's happening for a reason. See,
Mm,
materialism can account for that. They can't. In materialism, it's chaotic and random. And then and then this leads to subjectivity. Well, I could just make it mean whatever I want it to mean, and that's just as true as something else. But no, there's a design. Well,
mm,
if you don't feel like you're in the right body, there is a reason for that. And your hormones are going to be completely changed
boost.
due to a conflict shock. And
Mm,
that's going to motivate you to change your behavior and your self-image for your survival.
yeah.
So this is where,
But it's
when people
only
just
going
go, I
deeper
was
into
just born
conflict.
like this,
But it's
it's
only
going
going
deeper
deeper
into
into
conflict.
conflict,
Exactly.
right? It's not resolving the actual conflict. It's
Yeah,
even
that's right.
layering
It's
more
not
conflict on
resolving.
each other. Yeah.
And just burying. Now it's
That,
like you take the attitude, well, I was born this way. That whole narrative came from a couple of men, I don't remember when it was, 1950s or 60s,
um,
and they were testing sexuality and seeing if we're, this is very Freudian, we're inherently sexual beings. So when do we become sexual? And they would make 3-year-olds orgasm. And that is incredibly traumatizing for a 3-year-old because when you don't have the
mm,
hormones to understand sexuality, you
yeah.
will most of the times get a DHS. It will be a biological shock because you don't have the hormones to that's what puberty is. You don't have the hormones for it. So you end up ruminating
Yeah.
and perverting and this sort of thing.
So
And a
sick.
lot of the kids that they did these tests on
Yeah.
ended up killing themselves.
That's what
And
I'm saying.
some
That's so sick.
and
Why
I
would
know.
you kill a child?
So though that body of work determined that we are sexual beings and that you can just be born gay and that's just how it is.
Mm.
So what's wild is the LGBTQ movement doesn't even know where some of that philosophy started. That's now taught in schools.
Now it's wiped off the internet. And now it's almost
Well,
wiped
I
off the
mean, it's
internet.
on
You
you
see
could
the
find
news.
some documentaries on it. It's not going to be mainstream, but you could find
Oh,
it.
yeah.
But
Mm,
the thing is yeah, when people believe ideologies like this, they're creating more barriers to actually resolve the core conflicts that are causing them from a
mm,
very intelligent chain of events to feel like they're in the wrong body. That's happening for a specific reason designed built into nature. It's not a mistake. I get why you'd want to go, oh, it feels like I'm in the wrong body. Yeah, but that's happening for a reason. If
mm,
it's materialism, you decide the reason. You go, oh, it must be because I'm in the wrong body. But if you look into the laws that are governing nature, well, that GNM reveals as well, even the Bible talks about, then you see, okay, no, this is happening as an adaptation. Now, it's not wrong or bad, and it
mhm,
actually is natural for that
mhm.
adaptation to happen. It's still a natural phenomenon, it's in nature. it's happening so that I may resolve, not
Resolve.
so that I may create a new identity.
Yeah. And make it this whole big thing that was
Right.
identification, and not being able to even have an open-minded conversation about it because I'm so fixed, and it's true what I'm saying, and I cannot believe anything else you have to
Yeah,
say. Yeah, because I think that's kind of almost closing the minds off of people, right? And
absolutely.
it's making them
Absolutely.
almost be a slight bit more susceptible to
Yeah,
any wrong information.
totally. Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So another question is, how was sexuality used to subjugate the masses?
Mm. I mean, our animal nature. There's this quote. Now, I'm not a huge fan of this gospel, but
Mm,
I do like, and I say I'm not a huge fan because there's all these conspiracy theories. But anyway, in the Gospel of Thomas, I do
yeah.
like this one quote. It says, "Blessed is the man that who eats the lion, for the lion becomes man. Cursed
Mm,
is the man who the lion eats, for the man becomes lion." And
mm,
so the lion is our animal nature.
mm-hmm,
And, Jesus said the lion and the lamb will lay together. And so it's also, I believe, pointing to this process of being the bridge between human animal and human spirit. And through living the way that Jesus pointed, and through essentially resolving conflict,
mm,
uh, we will not be ruled by our animal nature. But so many people are ruled by their animal nature,
yes.
and marketing knows that. So they
Yes.
go, what makes a man valuable? He's big, strong alpha.
Mm,
And what does the alpha do? He gets all the women. He
yes.
leads the men. So they paint a picture of what they think a biological alpha would look like,
Mm,
which a real biological alpha is not the charismatic leader. They're not the Donald Trumps. They're not the Arnold
no.
Schwarzeneggers. Those are usually the very constellated megalomaniacs.
Yeah.
The true alpha male doesn't need to be on stage.
No.
They're just a fully mature male without territory conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
So they're usually just good. They're just good as they are. They're just taking care of business. They're just in the
Yeah.
background. So a biological male, most people have no idea what an actual alpha male is based on biology. So yeah, media will go, okay, especially using sex against, I'll talk about men and women.
Mm,
For men is like in the animal psyche, only the alpha gets sex.
mm-hmm.
So the fantasy of, look, you can have women and have sex, and you don't need to be the alpha. You don't need to get into conflict. You don't need to,
Mm,
and you could do it with our product or with our thing. It's
yeah.
like they're using this an intrinsic motivator that every man has, which is in a
Advertising.
sense to climb a hierarchy and to
Yeah.
be the alpha, and saying you don't have to do that. Use our product, use our thing,
Mm,
and that leads to sex and reproducing, which is a primary driver of males and
mm-hmm.
biology. And the
Yeah.
same thing will happen with females. It's like there's so many options out there nowadays. You hear like the 6 pack, 6 figures, 6 inches thing with females. Like that's what everyone's looking for.
Oh my
And
God.
you have these apps now, these dating apps, where it gives you the illusion of, well, I got 10,000 people in my area. So maybe there's a good guy. But if I look at these romance movies, it's giving me a picture of a man that's actually not in a masculine hormonal status most often. They're these very romantic, softy, poetic, like
Exactly.
love. And
Exactly.
that's not an actual biological
Yeah.
male. So a lot of women are trying to find women in men.
It's so true.
And they actually find a man, they're trying to change them into a woman.
Yes.
And
Both genders are just trying to make the other gender behave more like them.
yeah, but I mean, for male, maybe, but for a male that's an actual biological male, they only want
Mm,
a feminine woman. But the same
yeah.
thing goes typically for a woman that's in a female status wants a masculine man. But so often because of their conflicts, that's scary or intimidating, and it's actually easier to get, and it feels more comforting and
Mm,
validating to get this hyper romantic version of a man, but that's usually a Casanova. That's usually a man that has a sexual rejection conflict
yeah.
and territory loss. and he will say whatever he needs to say. So
Exactly.
the big, big advertising and whatnot will portray images of men to women that look very attractive, that have nothing to do with an actual biologically male man.
Mm.
And then women will look for that. And then when you have dating apps that are so oversaturated, you will throw away the opportunity to have a good man because you're looking for the Disney-fied
Yeah. Because
prince.
we're so desensitized also, and
Right.
we don't really know what the real meaning of a thing is. So
Mhm.
we see a movie and we think, oh, that's the one. Or,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
it's very, very interesting. Wow. I learned a lot today, actually, for me personally. That's really, really interesting. Wow. I don't have any other questions, so I would say if you have anything to say about the GNM or ISI, or maybe a slight bit how it works.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm
Mm.
having, I don't know when you're going to get this out, but starting September 7th, I'm launching the circle, which it's called the Trinity Edition because the first three sessions are going to be about God and relationship with Jesus and how that brings us through a re-identification process that kind
Mm.
of lays the foundation to resolving conflicts, which is the second part we go into, is the German
Yeah.
New Medicine part and the nature of conflicts, figuring out your specific conflicts. And then the last three sessions are on ISI, which is the I'd say more of like the art of resolving conflicts, which
Mm.
we can call it forgiveness, but it's a lot deeper and more nuanced. There's
Mm.
10 dimensions to it that you kind of learn, and you'll learn it to the degree in which you can help take other people through it. And it's something that when you learn the principles of GNM and the five biological laws, it's going to change how you interact with your friends. You're not going to feel fear of, first of all, viruses don't exist. I'm going to put all the evidence of that in there. You won't be worried about getting sick. You'll teach
Mhm.
your children very differently. And you also have a process of resolving and kind of become your own doctor.
Mm.
So it's going to be really deep this round. And soon, maybe not this round, but maybe after this round, it'll actually be something that an open community that you could join anytime. But right now, it
Mhm.
is closed. So there's that. And then I also take one-on-one sessions as
Yeah.
well, which is all of that is on my Instagram, which is Brandon.Bozarth.
Yeah. I saw it. I went to every single link. Yeah, actually, it was so great to have a conversation with you, Brandon. Really, I learned a lot.
Likewise, this is really fun.
Yeah, this was really fun. Maybe we can do this again. Honestly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Brandon.
Thank you so much, Isra. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Goodbye.